Well, come to Tales of Wild, West, a letter arrived in late spring, tucked between a prayer pamphlet and a cracked photograph of their father, long since buried beneath the cottonwood tree. The paper bore the scent of pipe smoke and cattle grease, and its edges curled like it had come a long way through weather and wear. It was addressed to Miss Eliza Whalen, written in a heavy, deliberate hand that spoke of solitude. Eliza read it aloud once, then twice, each time with more sweetness in her voice. Her words curled around descriptions of broad acreage, a strong roof and pantry well-stocked, and a line that made her eyes glint with hungry light. A man of sturdy means seeks companionship and a God-fearing woman to wed. Beside her, Clara stitched quietly. Her fingers moved with careful rhythm, her eyes never lifting from the thread. She had known the moment the envelope arrived that it would change something. Eliza had a way of drawing fate toward herself, like lightning to high ground. And Clara, well, Clara was the ground beneath. "I'll go," Eliza declared, folding the letter like it was already hers. This could be it, Clara. No more cracked teacups. No more skirts washed until the color runs out. A real man. A house with shutters. Maybe even piano. Clara looked up, the needle paused in her hand. "It says he's stout." Eliza scoffed, a sharp flutter of laughter. Men always downplay their charms. "Stout means he's got a belly and a beard. Nothing tragic. Besides, he owns land. If he waddles, we'll get a buggy." There was no real discussion after that. Eliza had already packed the best of their things. Her silk gloves, the blue parasol with a broken tip, the locket their mother gave her. She insisted Clara come too, for company, and maybe to help her make a graceful impression. "You always know what fork to use," she had said, "and you calm my nerves." So the two sisters boarded a freight wagon heading west, bundled in wool and thin hopes. The plains rolled past like waves in slow motion. Towns came and went, dusty, hollow-eyed places with children chasing dogs, and saloons that leaned to one side like drunks too tired to stand straight. Eliza talked most of the way. She spoke of dresses she'd wear, names she'd consider if children came. She asked Clara if she thought love could grow from practicality. Clara gave the same answer every time. Maybe it doesn't need to grow. Maybe it just needs to settle in. They reached this land near dusk, somewhere between the edge of Kansas and the beginning of nowhere. The sky was pale gold, and the wind stirred the grass like it was whispering secrets. A man stood on the porch of a long, low house. The boards beneath him creaked, though he didn't move. He was larger than the letter had let on. Broad, yes, but slow in the way trees are slow, still until they shift, then overwhelming. His shirt strained the buttons, and his hands were like shovels. But what caught Clara wasn't his belly nor the wear of his boots. It was the way he looked at Eliza. Not hungry, not desperate, just waiting. He introduced himself as Thomas Raddick. His voice was gravel and rust. He tipped his hat and offered them cold buttermilk, his eyes flicking to Clara only briefly before fixing on Eliza again, like trying to memorize her. Inside, the home was neat. Worn, yes, but not neglected. A woman's touch had once lived there. A pair of dried flowers hung above the hearth. A small embroidered pillow sat alone on the rocker. Clara noticed a photo on the mantel. A younger Thomas and a woman with soft eyes, now gone. After supper, Eliza sat stiff-backed, her smile polite but brittle. "I didn't expect," she began, then let the sentence drift. Thomas nodded, as if he'd heard the words anyway. "I described myself honest." "You did," Eliza said, "but there's honest and there's underspoken." Clara saw it then. The shift, Eliza's eyes cooled. She'd already decided. He wasn't the story she wanted to live. That night, in the small room they shared, Clara listened as Eliza folded her dresses too neatly. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed. "He's kind," Clara said softly. "And I'm not desperate," Eliza replied, sharper than necessary. "This life, this house, it smells like endings, not beginnings. I can't breathe here." Clara didn't argue. She rarely did. At dawn, Eliza was gone. She left a note for Thomas, brief and vague. She'd taken the eastbound stage of a man named Hollis who drove wagons and promised adventure. She signed it with gratitude and apologies, as though she were declining a dinner invitation, not a life. Thomas found the note and said nothing for a long time, just stared out at the sun dragging itself over the hills. Then he folded the paper and placed it in a drawer, without a word. Clara expected him to ask when she'd be leaving too, but days passed, and no such question came, so she stayed. She mended the torn curtain in the kitchen. She swept the porch and warmed leftover biscuits in the skillet. She didn't speak much, and neither did he. One evening, while she was pouring feed into the chicken trough, Thomas approached. His shadow stretched long across the soil. "I never asked you," he said slowly. "Did you come for the land, too?" Clara looked at him, dust on her palms and a ribbon falling loose from her braid. "I came because my sister needed me. And now—" She hesitated. The chickens clucked softly, the sky beginning to bruise with twilight. "Now," she said, the words caught somewhere between truth and fear. "Now I wonder if she left too soon." Thomas said nothing, but in his silence, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Two people who weren't chosen, but remained. That night, Clara passed the empty bed beside hers and pulled the quilt tighter. And on the porch, under the way of the sky full of stars, Thomas opened the drawer, reread the note, and quietly burned it in the lantern's flame. Mornings came quiet on the Raddick Ranch, where the wind did most of the talking. Clara rose before the rooster called, slipping into her boots with the hush of someone still unsure if they belonged. The house held its breath around her, with groaning softly, embers whispering their last warmth. She moved through it like a ghost that tidied. Thomas had taken to starting his day outside, boots crunching over dry soil before the frost lifted. She'd watch him from the window sometimes, not spying, just studying the man she now shared silence with. He worked with a steadiness that spoke of routine learned long before grief moved in, his broad back bent with purpose, his hands callous but careful. He didn't rush the animals, didn't snap at the rusted gate when it caught. Clara found something sacred in his rhythms. They spoke little that first week. Polite exchanges. "Yes, thank you. I'll fix that. No trouble." His voice stayed low, eyes flicking away like words cost more than they used to. She respected the space, treating the kitchen like borrowed ground and the fields like chapel pews. Each step measured respectful, as if afraid to wake old sorrow. Still, her presence left ripples. The hearth stayed lit past sundown now. Clean laundry appeared folded without fanfare. One afternoon, she dusted the piano in the corner room. Its keys were yellowed, its strings stubborn, but she played a hymn, soft and uneven. Thomas paused outside the window with an armful of kindling, not stepping in, not stepping away. The townsfolk noticed, as townsfolk always do. At the mercantile, Mrs. Grinshaw narrowed her eyes behind a row of dried peaches. "So you stayed," she said, like it was a choice Clara wasn't entitled to. Clara tucked her hands into her apron. "I did." The woman sniffed. "Strange girl leaves, stranger girl stays. Makes folks wonder what you're after." Clara offered no answer, only picked up a tin of coffee and placed it gently on the counter. Word traveled faster than wagons. That she was still in the house. That she wore the man's dead wife's gloves when feeding the chickens. That she smiled at the butcher's dog. That she sang sometimes while hanging clothes. All of it harmless, and all of it enough to stir suspicion in a town built on assumptions. When Clara brought the news home, the murmurings, the sideways glances, Thomas only nodded. "They'll talk," he said. "Then they'll stop." She wanted to believe him. One evening, after a day hot enough to curl the grass, she brought supper to the porch. She didn't ask if he wanted company, just set a plate down beside his and sat. They ate in silence, forks clinking gently. After a long pause, Thomas spoke without turning. "You don't owe me anything, Clara." She looked up. "I never said I did. You should go if you want. I won't think less of you." She took her time replying, tasting the air like it carried more than just dust. "You didn't ask me to stay, but you didn't ask me to leave either." He nodded once, slowly, as if weighing the truth in her words. Another silence bloomed, this one not awkward, but ripe. She leaned back against the post, watching the stars arrive one by one. Somewhere in the fields, a cow lowed like a lullaby. He shifted beside her. I was married once. I know, she said. She liked to hum. Always off key. God, it used to drive me mad. Now I'd give a year of wages to hear it again. Clara turned her gaze toward the edge of the porch where the land dropped into golden hush. My sister hums too, always just enough to be noticed. Thomas looked at her then, really looked, not through her, not around her, but directly, as if seeing the woman, not the echo. You're not like her. Clara smiled, faint and crooked. She wouldn't take that as a compliment. Maybe it's not for her. In that moment, something in her unraveled. Just a thread. Just enough. The next morning, she found an old bench behind the barn. The wood was splintered, the legs crooked. She dragged it to the front porch and spent the day sanding it smooth. He didn't say a word about it, just handed her a tin of paint that night, blue-gray like the dusk sky. They painted it together. She worked on one end, him the other, their arms moving in unison like some slow, forgotten dance. When their hands brushed briefly, neither pulled away. Claire found herself laughing more, but only when it felt natural. She began placing wildflowers in a cracked vase near the sink. Sometimes she cooked meals that reminded her of home. Other times she tried his recipes, salter, heartier, made for winter bodies. One afternoon, Thomas brought her a wrap bundle. Inside, a pair of well-worn gloves, too large for her hands, but warmer than anything she owned. They were hers, he said. Clara met his eyes. Are you sure? He nodded. She want you to use them. Her voice caught like a thread on a nail. Thank you. Time moved differently after that. Slower, but full. They began to fill the house not with noise, but with presence, with the gentle knowledge that someone else was breathing near. But the quiet didn't mean the past was gone. It came back one dusty Tuesday, when the stagecoach rolled in late. Clara had gone into town to collect sugar and soap. The driver nodded at her, then reached for a hand. A red glove emerged first, then a boot, then a familiar voice. Well, said Eliza, stepping down from the coach, her dress wrinkled and travel-stained. Seems my lucky star ran out somewhere past Santa Fe. Clara stood still, every muscle tight as piano wire. Eliza smiled like she'd never left, like she hadn't carved out the heart of man and left the rest behind. You gonna invite me home, little sister? Behind them, the wind picked up, the dust swirled, and in Clara's chest, something fragile and growing began to tremble. Eliza entered the house like a windstorm with a broken compass, smiling too wide, her boots clapping over floors Clara had just scrubbed. She threw her bag down by the hearth, uninvited but certain of her place. The space dimmed around her, not from shadow, but from the way she soaked attention like parched soil. Thomas stood at the edge of the doorway, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. He looked older than he had the day Eliza left. Less from time, more from the weight of a woman returned. Clara stayed near the stove, hands busy with bread dough, fingers sinking deep into the softness. She didn't speak. Eliza did enough of that for them all. You painted the bench, Eliza observed, glancing out the window. It's quaint, country romantic. Looks like something out of a penny novel. Clara pressed the dough harder than needed. Her silence wasn't shyness. It was control. I stayed with a merchant in Santa Fe. Eliza went on, voice syrupy. He promised me California. Turned out he meant Bakersfield. I told him I wasn't meant for dirt roads and garlic fields. She laughed like the joke was universal. Thomas didn't laugh. You look different, she added, eyes flicking to Clara. Healthier. Or maybe just fuller around the face. I work, Clara said softly. And wear my gloves, Eliza replied, nodding toward the pair by the door. Mama always said you took what wasn't yours. The room pulsed with an old ache. Years of words Clara never said rising like steam from boiling water. But she turned instead, wiped her hands, and moved past Eliza with the grace of a woman who had learned to survive by not reacting. Later, Clara found Thomas fixing the corral fence, his hammer rhythmic, precise. She stood near him for a while before speaking. Are you angry she's back? He didn't stop his work. I'm not sure what I am. She left you. I wasn't much to leave. Just a name on a page and a pantry of dried beans. She's trying to charm you again. He paused, hammered midair, and looked at her. I'm not who I was when she left. Clara nodded, then said nothing more. The wind carried their unspoken thoughts out toward the hills. That evening, the three of them shared supper. The table, once intimate, now felt too small. Eliza talked of city fashions and music halls, her hands animated, her laughter too sharp for the quiet house. Thomas listened with the politeness of a host, but his eyes wandered toward the chipped mug Clara always used, toward the hand-sewn runner she'd placed down just last week. Clara ate little. Each bite sat heavy. The space she'd grown into now shrank with every one of Eliza's breaths. After dinner, Eliza offered to play the piano, announcing she still remembered Claire de Lune. Her fingers tripped over keys, but she smiled as if each note was perfect. Thomas stood in the corner, arms folded, silent. Clara slipped away, out onto the porch where night air wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl of regret. The stars blurred above her. Not from tears. She wasn't crying, but from the way hope stretched when it got too thin. Days passed. Eliza lingered. She took Clara's chores without asking, then complained of the calluses. She wore Clara's shawl, told townsfolk how she had returned to reclaim her rightful place. People in town stopped whispering and started watching. One morning, Clara found her mother's brooch missing from her drawer. She knew better than to ask. Eliza had always taken with the confidence of someone convinced everything belonged to her eventually. Thomas tried to keep peace. He worked later in the fields, came in with dirt caked to his boots and weariness on his shoulders. He spoke less, not from coldness, but exhaustion. Clara stayed, but part of her began to curl inward, like a flower pressed between book pages. Preserved, yes, but no longer living. Then came the storm. It struck fast, lightning clawing across the sky, like the prairie gods were furious. The roof groaned under the weight of rain. Clara rushed to place pots beneath leaks, her feet sliding on slick boards. Thomas joined her with nails and planks. Together, soaked and breathless, they patched and secured. At one point she slipped. His hands caught her. For a moment, everything else vanished. The thunder, the dripping, the other woman asleep beneath their roof. His fingers lingered at her waist. Their eyes locked. I didn't think you'd stay this long, he said quietly. I didn't plan to. You make this place feel like something worth staying for. Her breath hitched, but before either could speak more, the door creaked open. Eliza stood in the frame, arms crossed, mouth curling in a way that made Clara's skin flush cold. She said nothing, but her look said everything. Asterisk, I see you, and I won't let you win. Asterisk. The next day, Clara found the bench by the porch repainted. Bright red, uneven, garish. The soft blue she and Thomas had chosen vanished beneath thick layers. She touched it, fingers trembling. That night, Thomas placed a wrapped bundle on the table. Inside, a book of wildflower sketches. I saw it in town. Thought you might like it. Clara traced a drawing of blue flax. You remembered. He nodded. You told me you planted them back home. Behind them, Eliza's boots clicked across the floor. Well, she said sweetly, looks like you've been very attentive. Thomas stood, his voice calm but firm. You're not owed anything, Eliza. Her smile faltered. I'm your intended. No, you were a letter. She became a life. Eliza's mouth opened. Closed. Clara turned away, not to gloat, but because the moment felt too sacred for eyes. Later, under the same star she once watched alone, Clara sat on the edge of the porch. The wind stirred the red paint sharp scent, bitter in her nose. Thomas sat beside her. She's not leaving, Clara whispered. Not yet. I know. She'll try to ruin it. I won't let her. They sat in the quiet. And just when Clara thought the night had settled into calm, Thomas said, almost under his breath, Would you still stay if it were only you, I asked? Eliza began rising earlier, slipping into the kitchen before Clara, her perfume too thick for dawn. She'd stir the porridge wrong. burning it or making it too thin, but wore an apron anyway, as if she belonged. Clara said nothing, just cleaned after her with quiet hands. It became a pattern. Eliza taking space. Clara giving it back. Thomas tried to act unchanged. He split wood with more force than usual, worked longer in the fields, his shirt stained dark with sweat before the sun reached its peak. He didn't say much to either woman, but Clara caught him watching sometimes. At supper, when she passed the salt without a word, or when she hung the laundry just so, the clothespins aligned like soldiers. He noticed her stillness, the way it steadied things. Eliza noticed, too. "You're very good at being invisible," she said one morning, leaning against the porch rail, sipping coffee she hadn't brewed. Clara didn't answer. "That's always been your trick, hasn't it?" Eliza went on, "Folding yourself so small they forget you're there, until it suits you not to be." Clara met her gaze. "I don't fold. I just don't shout." Eliza smiled thinly. "You've done well here. The house looks tolerable." Clara nodded. "Thank you." There was nothing left to say, but the silence between them was barbed. In town, the whispers grew louder. Clara heard them behind sacks of flour and between rows of canned peaches. The fat one's bride came back. No, his real bride. She left him. Still her name on the paper, ain't it? She's just being kind, letting the sister stay. Blood over paper. Clara bought what they needed and left quickly, her head high, cheeks burning. At home, she set the groceries down with more force than usual. Thomas turned from the window. "They're saying things," she said. "I know." She looked at him then, all the softness pulled taut. "And you haven't said anything back." He crossed to her, quiet as always. "To who?" "To them." "To her." "To me." Her voice cracked like old wood. "You just stand in the middle." He reached for her hand. "I thought you stayed because you saw who I was." "I did." Her eyes were glassy. "But I need you to see who I am, too." He held her gaze, a storm flickering behind his silence. "You think I don't?" She pulled away. "I don't know what to think anymore." That night, Clara didn't sit on the porch. She went to bed early, turned her face to the wall. Outside, wind pushed against the shutters. It felt like the house had begun to lean. In the following days, Eliza made herself useful on the surface. She baked, sloppily but with flair, and visited the neighbors under the pretense of reintroducing herself. One afternoon, Clara caught her riding into town alone in the wagon, wearing Clara's shawl and humming. When she returned, she handed Thomas a slip of paper. "I spoke with the notary," she said. "My name's still on the record. It can be amended, of course, but—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang. Thomas didn't take the paper. Eliza shrugged, set it on the table, and walked off humming the same off-key song that used to drive him mad. Clara found him there minutes later, staring at the document like it might catch fire if he looked long enough. She picked it up, read it. Her name wasn't mentioned anywhere. "This was never meant for me," she said. Thomas didn't look up. "I didn't know what I was asking when I wrote that letter." "You were asking for her," Clara said softly. He closed his eyes. "Maybe, but I got you instead. And every day since, I've thanked God for that mistake." She held his gaze. "But you haven't told her." The words felt heavier than they should have, but they landed with truth. He stood, the legs of the chair scraping too loud. "I'll fix it," he said. Clara nodded, but something in her had already begun to drift. The next morning, Clara saddled the mare before the sun crested the ridge. Her bag was small, just a shawl, a book of sketches, and the gloves. She didn't leave a note. She figured they'd know where she went, if they cared to look. The hills greeted her with silence, the kind that fills the lungs but empties the chest. She rode without hurry, each hoofbeat steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down something inevitable. At midday, she stopped beneath a cluster of pines and opened a book, page after page of flowers, drawn by someone who remembered she liked blue flax. She closed it quickly. She didn't cry. Not then. Back at the ranch, Thomas found the stable empty, the gloves missing, the shawl gone. He sat on the porch, the red bench glaring beneath him. Eliza brought him coffee without being asked. Maybe it's better this way. He looked at her, really looked. You always win, don't you? He asked. She blinked. What's that supposed to mean? You take things just to prove you can. She narrowed her eyes. Don't pretend she didn't want this. She stayed when it suited her. She left when it didn't. Thomas stood, the bench creaking as he rose. No, she stayed when you ran. And she left when I failed to tell her she was the only reason this house felt like home again. Eliza's expression faltered. She wasn't your replacement, he said. You were never her competition. He turned and walked toward the barn. That evening, as the sun poured fire over the fields, he hitched the wagon and headed toward the hills. Eliza watched him go, arms folded, lips pressed tight, and as the dust rose behind the wheels, she whispered into the empty yard, as if it might answer, what if she doesn't want to come back? Clara sat beneath a juniper tree that leaned east like it had grown weary of resisting the wind. The sky above stretched wide and pale, the horizon smeared in brushstroke gold. Her mare grazed nearby, reins tied to a crooked branch. She sat with her knees drawn up, arms around her legs, the flower book in her lap unopened. It had been hours since she'd left, but the ache in her chest felt older than that, years older. She thought of the porch, the soft scrape of broom bristles, the way the house settled at night like it, too, was finally able to breathe. She belonged there, not because of a name on a page, but because she had poured herself into every quiet corner. And still, somehow, it hadn't been enough. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. She didn't turn. I wondered if you'd ride north, Thomas said, his voice low, almost reverent. The land always opens up here, like it's trying to tell you something. She let out a soft breath, more exhale than reply. The wind rustled the sagebrush like it was listening in. I didn't want you to come, she said at last. I know, but you did. I had to. He took a few more steps, then sat beside her, not too close, but not far enough to leave doubt. His hands rested on his knees, wide and worn. I've been quiet most of my life, he said. Figure it was better to do right than talk about doing it. But I see now silence can hurt, too. Clara stared out at the ridgeline, jaw set. She made herself a storm. I made myself a shelter. And you stood between us, afraid to close the door on either one. He looked down, shame flickering through him like a shadow crossing the sun. You're right. I didn't want to be the man who chose wrong again. And so you didn't choose at all. He opened his mouth, then shut it. A long pause followed. Do you remember the night the roof leaked? He asked. Clara blinked at the sudden shift, but nodded. You caught me when I slipped. He smiled faintly. I think about that moment. Not the fall, not the rain. Just how natural it felt, reaching for you. Her throat tightened. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You stayed when no one asked. Loved this place before it ever gave anything back. And I let your worth be measured by someone else's absence. She finally turned toward him. I needed you to see me. I see you now. Silence again, but this time it hummed with something warm, something growing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, folded neatly. Familiar. She left this, he said, handing it to her. It was the original contract, her sister's name, inked in proud cursive, sealed by the notary. She wanted to remind me what I owed, he said, but I burned the copy she gave me. Clara looked up, startled. But this one, he continued, I kept to show you that I chose not to honor it, not because of shame or guilt, but because it no longer held meaning. You did. Her hands trembled slightly as she refolded the paper. I've never asked you proper, he said softly. Never said the words. I don't have a ring. I don't have poetry. She met his eyes, steady and wide. But I have a bench we built together. I have a home that only feels like one when you're in it. And if you come back, Clara Whalen, I will choose you every day in every way I forgot to before. Her heart caught. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his coat, then held out his hand, not as a question, but as an offering. She hesitated, then took it. When they reached the ranch, The sun was hanging low, the fields glowing like a fire not yet banked. Clara's shawl lay draped over the porch rail. The red bench stood stubbornly at the threshold. Clara paused. "I want it gone," she said. Thomas tilted his head. "The bench." "No," she whispered. "The red." He nodded. "We'll sand it tomorrow." Inside, Eliza was packing. Her face was drawn, her pride cracked but not shattered. "You came back," she said without turning. "I did." Eliza smoothed the collar of her dress. "I never meant to stay long. Just needed to remember who I was." Clara nodded. "And did you?" Eliza looked up, tired. "I remembered who you were instead." Neither hugged. Neither cried. But something softened. Eliza left at dusk, her shadow stretching long behind her. Thomas stood at the door until the dust settled. That night, Clara sat beside him on the porch, the stars silvering the sky. "Tell me something true," she said. He thought a moment. "The day you arrived, I thought you were the quiet one." "I am," she smiled. "But not silent," he replied. "Not anymore." He took her hand, placed it over his chest. "This is where you've been living," he said. "Every day." She leaned into him. No fireworks, no declarations, just warmth, shared and steady. In the quiet that followed, the house behind them seemed to settle again. And in that hush, Clara whispered, "Then let me stay."